I visited a friend in the hospital last week. By Rock Croc. Well, I wouldn't exactly call us friends. Tanner was a dick to me throughout my high school years, along with pretty much all of our fellow classmates. Always picking on me when I was at my lowest, or bullying some poor substitute teachers so badly they never showed up to our school again. Still, when I heard the news that his mansion in the rich side of our town had burned down, leaving him so horrifically scarred they couldn't even show the damage on the news, I couldn't help but feel bad for him. I first heard of the fire from a friend, who sounded a bit too excited when he told me what had happened. Even worse, another past classmate of ours, who works as a nurse in the same hospital he was treated at, told me nobody had even come to visit, not even his father. Back in high school, every time we finished our last class and waited for our parents to pick us up, nobody came for him. That always forced him to walk a couple of miles by himself, as us being a couple miles away from our middle of nowhere school. After a bit of gossiping with more old friends, I found out his mother died in labour, leaving him with a father who never seemed to take the stark look off his face in every photograph taken of him. At the time of the fire, Tanner's father was off in Italy for whatever things rich men travel for, leaving him completely alone in his possibly last few days of life. I was never the type to hold a grudge, always forgiving people I probably shouldn't, and helping out those who weren't the greatest to me. This is exactly why 2 days after the fire, I decided to visit Tanner in the hospital. When I arrived, the accountant was surprised to hear I wanted to visit him. He even warned me how badly the damage really was. I shrugged it off, of course. Injuries and gore never really bothered me anyways. Maybe that's why I'm such a big horror fan. After a lonely elevator ride and a walk down the strikingly white hallway, I finally arrived at room 34, Tanner's room. Peering inside, I noticed how dark the room was, the only light source being the semi-open shades of the window. As I stepped inside, I finally realized just how damn cold it was in the room, cold enough to place plenty of goosebumps on my arms. And after I pulled a curtain next to the bed, I saw him. Now, remember how I said I was okay with gore? This was way worse than I had imagined. Tanner's eyes and ears were completely missing, replaced with scarred and tattered holes where they would have normally been. Taking a closer look, I noticed most of his facial features were completely burned off, along with his hands and feet missing all toes and fingers. Multiple tubes, needles, and bags were connected to his shirtless chest and ruined arms. Did he even try to escape the fucking building? I thought to myself as I looked over his injuries again. The worst part, though, was the raspy, painful breathing coming inside his scarred throat, like even his lungs were also burnt to shreds. As Tanner laid almost motionless, I realized he hadn't even noticed me come in yet, or stand directly next to his bed. Taking a deep breath, I finally found the will to speak. Tanner, it's Corey, from Paleo High, remember? We were, good buddies. Nothing. Not even a turn of his head to face me as I spoke. After waiting a minute, I said his name again, and then again, and then again. Each time I spoke his name, my voice grew increasingly more annoyed. Does he not even recognize me? Even after everything he made me go through? I thought again as my face morphed into a frown. God, why even bother coming here? I never liked you. I'm not even sure if I really feel bad for you. Your family isn't even rich for a good reason. You people owned how many slaves again? And you still have the audacity to make life hard on others. You're pathetic, Tanner. You even still live on that fucking plantation. I'm sorry, man, but I'm glad it burned down. Finally done my rather scathing rant, I took a seat on the chair next to Tanner's bed. Looking back over him, I couldn't help but chuckle to myself when I put two and two together and processed that the scarred man didn't even have the ability to hear anything, much less see. I had practically ranted to a dead man. Stepping off the chair, I reached my hand over to the nub on the end of Tanner's burned arm, as a way of finally saying goodbye. As much as I hated him, I attempted to give him a sign that someone bothered visiting. But as soon as my palm wrapped around the hard skin, Tanner jumped in his seat, ripping a needle out of one of his arms and turning to face me. I'll admit, I screamed like a little girl when this happened, part of me not even believing he could have felt my touch with all the nerve damage. With the heart monitor suddenly beeping at an alarming pace, Tanner began ruthlessly coughing like he was about to attempt speech. Still frozen in fear, I watched him slowly regain his composure before leaning that ruined face where he guessed my head would be.
Dad, it's you, isn't it?
Every word that came out of Tanner's mouth sounded like it took an insane amount of effort to let out, his voice sounding even raspier than his already horrible breathing. Before I could process he could even still speak, his lips opened again.
I'm so glad you came. I was so scared. It came at me while I was about to go to sleep.
Tanner's grotesque voice now sounded like he was on the verge of tears.
But I got away, Dad. I had to burn our beautiful home down to escape, but I got away.
If Tanner still had tear ducts, I'm positive he would have begun bawling right now, judging by the tone of his voice. Even if at that moment I had a way of telling him I wasn't his father, I probably wouldn't have. Too intrigued to stop listening, I leaned my own head forward for a better listen.
It hurt so bad. It still does. They got me right to my chest. Go ahead, look.
After stumbling out another panicked sentence, Tanner waited on me to make the next move. Swallowing the spit that had been collecting in my mouth, I reached my free arm over, slowly lifting up Tanner's shirt to see just what he was talking about. To any of you still thinking you could remain calm if you were in my shoes, I guarantee what I saw would shake any person to their core. With my hands trembling against the fabric of his hospital gown, my eyes were met with several bite marks on my old bully's chest. Bites so deep they looked like they stopped only at bone, all over his already torn front. I would have just chalked it up to a wild dog if my eye didn't catch the most horrific part of his wounds. Right where Tanner's heart would be, were 3 words, carven into his flesh with a knife or whatever the hell was used to do that. Written in sloppy handwriting were the words, "Child of Sin." At the time, I had not a single idea of what these injuries could mean, instead reading those words over and over as the heart monitor sped up once more. I was brought out of my focus when Tanner began to speak up again, his voice much worse than it was before from the strain of his vocal cords.
I may have escaped, Dad, but they'll be back. We can't stop or even outrun them. No one in our family has been able to. They'll get us, just like they got Mom.
Everything Tanner said was like a punch to the gut, my hand on his discolored skin shaking and sweating. Letting go of his gown to cover those awful wounds, Tanner finally laid back down, his lungs making a grainy sound as he began to calm his breathing. Hearing footsteps outside the hallway, I slowly removed my soggy palm from Tanner, turning around just in time to see a nurse walk into the room with a plate of food and water. When our eyes met, we both recognized each other's faces. It was my friend Courtney, who worked at the hospital, the same one who told me about Tanner's circumstances while he was treated. A warm, friendly smile appeared on her face as she walked up to me, holding Tanner's meal in her hands. "Corey, I didn't see you come in. So nice of you to visit old Scarface over there." And that was mean. Let me tell you, I would have never done it. Remember that time he dropped a whole bowl of fruit punch on my new hair at prom? Such an asshole. My skin was still ice cold as she spoke, but she didn't seem to notice as she looked over at Tanner, putting the tray down and crossing her arms. "Oh great, he ripped another needle out. It was hard enough when we tried to sell this rich boy on his bed. I have never seen another person so angry that they were being tucked in." Courtney loved to talk, which is probably why she started to notice the lack of responses, along with my traumatized face. When she put the needle back in place, Tanner attempted to shift his arm away, asking where his father had gone in a shaky, withered voice. "Always babbling on about his father too. That guy's an even bigger asshole from what I..." Courtney cut herself off, something that's very uncharacteristic about her, as her face went as pale as mine. Her now widened eyes were now fixed on the blinds of the window. The hands holding the tray began to shake and spill some water. Slowly turning my head, I could literally feel my heart drop in my chest. Behind the separate slits of the window blinds were 3 pairs of white glowing eyes, like when you take a picture of a cat and they look like they're shooting lasers. I was unable to even catch my own breath, but I remembered this room was on the second floor of the hospital. While still not the highest floor, there was an easy 20 or 30 feet between the window and the outside floor. Dropping the tray completely, Courtney screamed in terror, food and water falling all over Tanner. Almost like they had noticed us, one of the creatures suddenly smashed the window open, glass shards tearing its inhumanly long arm and dripping dark green sludge from its wounds. But the cut didn't make it stop, instead pulling in another arm, then both legs. The figure looked like a freakishly tall man, its skin a crusty black color, blacker than night itself. His pupils were pure white, which almost distracted me from its lack of a nose and ears. The other two creatures, one a more feminine figure and the other much more childlike, just peered their heads inside. They all had several scars and lacerations around their body, like they were brutally beaten with fists, knives, and whips. Taking a step forward and crunching shattered glass under its wide and long feet, the creature approached, causing Courtney to fall to her knees in pure terror, tears running down her cheeks. Shifting its gaze from us, the beast stared only at Tanner, who was struggling and shifting in confusion from being lathered in food and water. No matter how hard I tried, my legs wouldn't move as I stood directly next to the hospital bed as the figure closed the distance.
Dad? Dad? What's going on? Where are you? I need you!
It wasn't a matter of time after Tanner began screaming that his voice completely gave out, his throat at its absolute limit. Ignoring Courtney and I completely, the beast leaned down, breathing hot and probably foul breath directly into Tanner's featureless face. Opening its mouth and letting its tongue fall out, the monster placed an uncomfortably long and wet lick on his burnt face, like Tanner was a human envelope. Pulling his gown down, the creature placed a long-fingered hand on the patient's chest, before using its unnaturally long and sharp nails to cut into his skin. Going up and down, side by side, and drawing a great deal of blood, the monster carved another sentence into Tanner's chest. After an uncomfortably long time of Tanner's silent screams and the monster's scribblings, it finally seemed to finish, pulling its blood-soaked finger away. If I wasn't already petrified enough, the creature moved its head to face me, pointing to his newly written sentence and glaring a wide smile at me, his scarily sharp teeth stained with blood. Figuring it wanted me to read what it wrote, I nervously moved my head as sweat poured off my body to read what the demon had carved. Tanner's chest now had 4 new words cut into it. Sinners bleed the sweetest. A deep, hysterical giggle is heard from the creature's mouth as I read, its grin growing so wide I thought its flesh would tear. After the creature realized that I had finished reading that hellish sentence, it let its jaw hang wide open, revealing 2 sets of razor-sharp teeth, before biting into Tanner's neck. A rapid beeping was heard from the monitor as everything that was connecting the patient to the bed was ripped right off. The 2 creatures still at the window broke down in horrific laughter, watching with equally horrific smiles as Tanner was torn off the bed and dragged across the floor. When the creature reached the window, his head slowly turned back to face me, looking Courtney and I up and down as it held a bleeding and squirming Tanner in its mouth. But instead of ripping into our flesh as well, the beast flashed me with another grin, before jumping out the window along with his 2 god-ugly companions. It took a lot for me not to throw up after they left, Courtney now fetal on the floor beside me. The room was completely silent. Blood, spilled food, and broken glass riddled the once clean floor. The pair of us remained as still as ever, not daring to move until a barrage of nurses and doctors rushed into the room to see what all the noise was. The police were quickly called, interviewing Courtney and I when they brought us to the police station, before writing us out as suspects. They never found Tanner, not even a single trace. His father was called, and last I heard he's refused to fly back to the country. No one knew why he wouldn't go to his son's funeral. Everyone called him a monster. But I know why. I know that coward is just buying some more time for himself. His sins will catch up to him, because they always do. If you're reading this, and you don't believe your past horrors will return, you're wrong. They always will. And they bite. I got a job as a night guard at a local supermarket. I'm already quitting. By Betty 559. Keeping up with college fees is difficult, to say the least. If I wanted to get a job, it would 9 times out of 10 be a night shift job. During the day, until about mid-noon, I have lessons. From then until about 6 PM, I have to do my homework. As I was scrolling through an endless supply of ads for minimum wage jobs, I came across one for the supermarket 5 minutes away from my campus. I sent an application through their email address. Surprisingly, they accepted it almost instantly. It had taken me by surprise when they sent an email back telling me that I was expected to show up tonight at 10 PM. It was still 7, so I made dinner and waited until about 9 to start getting ready. When I arrived, the day shift worker was already leaving. He showed me around a bit, and right before he left, he told me that there was a set of rules I have to follow in a book at my desk. Besides me, there was just the night cashier, with whom I only exchanged a few words. I went back to my table, and in one of the drawers I found said manual. Here's how it went. Hello, Night Owl. We welcome you to this position as a night guard with a set of rules to follow to ensure your safety. 1. Once about 20 minutes, do a round through the store. Should you notice anything out of the ordinary, immediately return to your desk and hide underneath it. It should leave after about 3 to 4 minutes. 2. Once every half an hour, go to the back of the store and count how many boxes there are. If there are more boxes, pick any which you want and throw it in the dumpster behind the building. If there are less boxes, it's too late. Get out of the store and lock the doors. Only return an hour later. 3. Talk to the cashier once in a while. Take notice of their appearance. Should they have a weird distinctive feature, take the gun from the drawer and shoot it. If it doesn't have a face, repeatedly yell at it to get out. It will eventually leave. Do not shoot it in that case. You will anger it. 4. Sometime during the hour of 3 AM, somebody will come in here, asking to speak with Jimmy. Keep saying that he doesn't work here, and it should leave. 5. Never manually open the doors for somebody outside. The doors are automatic. It can't trigger them. 6. If someone is heading to the checkout, even though they never entered, shoot them. No double guessing. As long as you follow these rules, you should be fine. Good luck! I closed the book and thought about what I just read. Surely this was just a try from the management of the store to keep me alert. Still, 21 minutes had passed since my shift started. I decided to do a round. As I was at my last 2 aisles, I noticed that at the base of one of them was a bag similar in appearance to one of Chip's, only it didn't have any kind of label. I picked it up and noticed that it was heavier than it should have been. I ripped it open, and an eye stared back at me. It was a bag full of eyes. I dropped it and sprinted to my desk and hid underneath it. I waited there until the alarms in my head stopped ringing. About 5 minutes later, I got out and went back to the aisle the bag was from. It was gone. Just as I was processing what just happened, I realized that half an hour had already passed since I started work. I quickly made my way to the back of the store. There needed to be 33 boxes. Just as the door creaked open, a box that hadn't been there before was sitting in the middle of the room. I didn't even take a good look at it, and it was already in the trash outside. I got back to my desk. Things were quiet for a while, but I remembered the 3rd rule, took my gun, and went to exchange a few words with the cashier. I didn't need to get too close, but I noticed it. The cashier only had one eye in the middle of her face. I pointed the gun at it and it didn't even flinch. I pulled the trigger. After a few seconds, a cashier with a normal looking face emerged from under the counter, as if nothing had happened. Again, I made my way back to my desk. Nothing happened for what I would estimate was an hour and a half. Suddenly, a man enters the building with a dark shadow cast over his face by the hat he was wearing. As he got closer, I realized that only skin covered the eyeless, mouthless, and noseless face. He started telling me that he wanted to speak with Jimmy. His voice didn't sound like it was coming from him, but rather from all around me. I kept telling him to leave, and eventually he did. Again, just like the calm before the storm, things quietened down. After a few quarters of the hour had passed, I heard tapping of the glass doors. Sure enough, there was a human at the door, mouthing the words, "Open it." As there was nothing in the book mentioned about what I should do in this situation, I just ignored him until it was gone. It was 4 AM at this point, and my shift ended at 6. I decided to do a round at the back of the store. I counted the boxes. 32. I got the hell out of there, told the cashier about that, and we both got out and locked the door. We waited for what seemed like the longest hour in the world. She didn't really seem fazed by any of this. I guess she was no stranger to these things. When we got back inside, someone was making their way to the front of the store with a basket full of goods, even though they never entered. I just shot him, and it turned to dust. Nothing happened, but when the day guard arrived, I was already making my way to my dorm by speedwalking. Even though I'd escaped that night rather unscathed, I won't risk it again. Better in debt than in a grave. P.S. As I'm writing this, they keep sending me offers to work as a night cashier. I said the last one had quit the day before, and another one was supposed to show up the night I worked there. But they didn't. My family did a bonfire ritual last Halloween. Now they're all dead. By Vera Stahl. It was my father's idea. He'd always been into the holidays, especially Christmas and Halloween, and he loved finding weird activities for us to spice up our normal festivities. He'd scour the internet for obscure customs for eggs at Easter, or a homemade recipe for eggnog that took hours to make and tasted like ass. Or as he did last year, a Halloween bonfire ritual. He didn't tell us much about it ahead of time, but that wasn't out of the ordinary. Me and Mom had been around long enough to be used to his bullshit. We knew it was better to just write it out with as few questions as possible, as questioning or complaining never did anything but slow the whole process down. As for the twins, they were only 10, thought pretty much everything Dad did was awesome. That had nothing to do with the fact that he spoiled them constantly, while the main thing he gave me, his only son, was a hard time. Nope, nothing at all. Still, I couldn't bitch too much about the bonfire thing. Bonfires are cool. As far as this holiday bullshit went, it didn't take too much effort. We just had to light a big bonfire on Halloween night, and when the fire was out the next morning, we spread the ashes into a circle. Once the circle was made, we each picked a rock and we put it inside the circle near the edge. Dad told us that we'd come back the next day and check on the rocks. That's where the details of it all got a bit more fuzzy. When Mom asked why we were doing any of this, we just shrugged. Said he'd been skimming through different Halloween customs online, and this one was something about telling your fortune over the next year. He laughed, said his main goal had been to have a bonfire on Halloween, but if we wanted, we could always track down exactly what the stones were supposed to mean. I shot Mom a look and we both started shaking our heads. She smiled at him. "No, that's okay, honey. The bonfire was fun either way." That seemed to satisfy Dad at the time, and it wasn't until the next afternoon that he came in from the yard, his expression worried and tense. The rest of us were all in the living room watching some dumb show on TV at the time, and when he walked in and turned off the TV show, the twins started to do their spoiled baby whine. He shot them a hard look and told them to be quiet, and I sat up. Whatever this was, it was serious. "What's the matter?" My mother tried to keep her voice light, but she still sounded concerned. My father gave her a slight smile and a shrug. "Nothing, it's nothing. Just... who took the stones from the bonfire circle?" He glanced at each of us in turn as he spoke, his face drawn and pale. "What stones?" "Oh, you mean the ones..." He cut her off, his tone harsher now. "Yes, Martha, the stones we put in yesterday morning. I just thought about it, and when I went to go check, they were all gone. So I want to know who took them." My mother frowned at him. Why would anyone take those rocks? Couldn't they have just rolled away or gotten moved away by the wind? Dad was already shaking his head. "We built that fire on a level spot. There hasn't been much wind the last few days. Definitely not enough to blow our rocks out of the ash circle." He turned his gaze back to me. "So who moved the rocks?" I met and held his gaze, though I could hear blood thrumming in my ears. "Not me. I thought it was dumb to begin with. I mean, the bonfire was cool, but I never knew what the point of the rocks even was." staring at me a moment longer. He finally shifted to the twins. Girls, did you take the rocks we put out there? No, Dad, they said in unison. John, what's this about? What's the big deal? Martha, did you take them? Mom rolled her eyes. No, of course not. But what does it matter? Why are you upset about some rocks anyway? He seemed on the edge of some decision then. Perhaps an internal weighing of whether he should say more or let it drop. After a couple of seconds, he forced another small smile. Nah, it's nothing. Just dumb Halloween stuff, right? What are we on for dinner? That was the last we talked about as a family. After a couple of days, I forgot about him. The next few months were a pretty good time for all of us, and that following summer, I was busy getting everything ready for moving into a college dorm for the first time. I was going to miss being close to my family and high school friends, sure, but there was also this nervous excitement when I looked into the unknowable future that lay before me. I was online looking at places I might want to get a job near the campus when my father called me. I could barely make out anything he was saying because he was crying so hard. Mom had been carrying the girls to dance class when they got T-boned by a logging truck. They were all dead before the first sirens got there. I almost deferred on school. Told Dad I could start a semester later without being a big deal if he wanted me to stay around a few more months. He told me no, in that hollow way he always spoke now, words echoing out like musical notes from a mechanical organ with no hand or heart to guide them. Even then, as I racked my brain for some way to make things better, I never thought about the bonfire or the stones. Not until my dad begged me to come home this past weekend. He'd been growing more anxious and strange the last couple of times we talked on the phone, and I'd been planning on going home for my fall break in a few days anyway, so I didn't see the harm in skipping my last couple of classes and heading back early. I knew something was wrong as soon as I pulled into the driveway. The grass was overgrown and there was trash piled up on the side porch. And when I tried to get in the front door, my key still worked, but the door wouldn't budge. Knocking and calling for him to open up, I heard him undo 3 more locks before he cracked the door and peered out at me with red-rimmed eyes. I could smell alcohol in his breath, and when he swung the door wide and swept me up in a bear hug, the stale sweat stink of him nearly took my breath away. Hugging him back at first, I finally pulled away and walked past him inside. The house wasn't filthy, but it was messy and cluttered with filled trash bags. Walking further in, I saw several empty beer cans in the living room, and harder stuff on the half of the kitchen table I could make out from there. Dad seemed to pick up on my worried look as he patted me on my shoulder. Sorry, been meaning to clean up more. I thought you were coming on Saturday. I frowned at him. Dad, it is Saturday. How have you been going to work? Going out at all? He gave me a warm smile and shrugged. I have, sure. Just less lately. I can do a lot of my work from here, and they understand. Bereavement leave, they call it. I nodded. Okay, I mean, that's good. But you don't look so hot. He turned and relocked the front door. A chain and 2 more deadbolts on top of what had already been there. Keeping his back turned, I saw a shoulder slump. I know how it looks. I've just been going through a real hard time. I feel like I'm somehow responsible for what happened to your mom and the girls. When he finally did turn, his face looked haunted. And lately, the more I think about it, the more afraid I am that the same kind of thing is going to happen to me and you. Crazy as that sounds. Sitting my bag down, I stared at him. Dad, that is fucking crazy. It was the stupid truck driver's fault, not yours. What are you talking about? Tears sprang into his eyes. He looked up at the ceiling. That bonfire. That damn bonfire game with the rocks and all. Me and my stupid bullshit. I didn't think there was anything to it, of course. I forgot about after we did the rocks. His lip began to tremble. But when I did remember, and I went out and looked, when the rocks had all disappeared, I looked it up again, right there in the yard before I came inside. Remember me coming in and asking you all about the rocks being missing? I nodded slowly, my stomach beginning to twist on itself. Yeah, sure, I do, but listen, I looked back up what that whole thing was. I'd been wrong. It wasn't just a way of seeing your future for the next year. It was... oh, God. It was supposed to warn you if you were going to die in the next year. Dad, just let... He raised his hand and kept going. No, I've kept this a secret for a year, and it's been eating me up. Especially since this summer. I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want you to hate me or think I was crazy, but I have to say it. The website said it was an old ritual, and that if a person's stone was damaged or disappeared by the next day, that meant they'd die before the next Halloween. And Dad buried his face in his hands as he began to slide down the wall to the floor. And I don't know if it just predicted it or if it caused it, but they died. And if it did cause it, then I caused it, didn't I? He sniffled wetly into his palm. And if that's true, was to keep it from taking you or me. The hall felt like it was spinning, and my knees were shaky and weak as I knelt down next to him. Dad, that's not the way the world works. It was just some silly old superstition, and the stones didn't just disappear. It was my fault. He looked up at me, eyes still streaming. What are you saying? You're just lying to make me feel better. I appreciate it, but it doesn't... I grabbed his arm and gave it a squeeze as I softly interrupted him. No. Come out back and I'll see if I can show you. Helping him to his feet, I took him out the back and across the yard to the tool shed. Heart in my throat, I looked between the back of the shed and the small propane tank that fed gas to the heater and oven in the house. At first I thought it was gone, but then I saw it, tucked further back in the shadows underneath the tank, but still there. Sucking in a breath, I reached in and pulled out a small shoebox that had once held General Jasmine's ice skates. Turning toward my father, I opened it up and showed him the stones inside. I took them. I did it late the same day we put them out. At the time I thought it was going to be a funny prank or something, but then when you came in and acted mad about it, I guess I got scared. I played dumb, and then I forgot about after. I felt tears springing to my eyes. Jesus, I'm so sorry. I had no idea you'd been obsessing about this the entire time. Dad looked in the box, and then up to me. This isn't right. I shook my head. It is. There's no magic. Just bad fucking luck and a kid who was too dumb to see what his dad was going through. I'm so sorry. He looked at the stones again. No, we're still not safe. Not until we can find. Sighing, I pushed past him. I need to end this now. And maybe reversing what I did was the only way to really convince him that everything was, well, if not okay, at least not going to get any worse. Fine then. I'll put them back where I found them, okay? I could still see the sooty edge of the ring of ash and spots, even after all this time. Was that strange? Wouldn't it have washed away a long time ago? Or the grass growing back there already? No, I was letting him infect me with his weird crazy grief. This needed to be over. You're not listening to me. That's... Stepping over into the circle, I dumped the stones back out onto the ground. As I looked back up, I tried to keep the frustration out of my voice. It was all my fault after all. See, they're back. We're fine. And they're just rocks anyway. None of this actually means... There's only 4. He wasn't looking at me now, but down at my feet. And as I followed his gaze, I felt my tongue grow thick. He was right. I hadn't noticed it before, but there had been 5 stones when I took them. 1 for each of us. Not one of them was missing. Forcing a smile, I looked back up at him. Dad, it still doesn't... The day split in 2 as a thunderclap sent me hurtling 20 feet back, until it finally slid to a stop on the far side of the ash circle. Eyes watering and ears ringing, I looked around for what had happened. That's when I saw my father, somehow still standing. What was left of him, at least. When the propane tank blew, a foot-long shard of metal had cut him nearly in half between his neck and right shoulder, before missing me and burying itself deep into a far garden wall. He stood there, staring at me, as it peeled apart like a wilting flower, and then he just toppled over dead onto the ground. I wanted to scream, but my chest hurt too much. Gasping and coughing, I slowly got my breath back enough to let out a small wheezing wail as I crawled my way forward. I stretched out one trembling hand and grasped one of the rocks I'd dumped out so casually before, gripping it now as though my life depended on it. It was a pointed chunk of dark granite, and I remembered picking it. It was my rock the year before. Letting out a weak sob, I crawled up on my rock in the center of the ash circle, far away from the uncertainty that lay beyond its edge, and nestled close to where the bonfire's light had once lived. And where, just maybe, I could still live too. The Monster is Real by Fisherman Tales. Of all the kids who lay awake at night in fear of the monster lurking underneath their bed, I might be the only one to ever found theirs to be real. It began 20 years ago when I heard something go bump in the night. Now, granted, a lot of things can go bump in the night. Only about half of them are actually scary. But this particular bump came from under my bed. I was just a boy then, only 10, and when I heard that bump but a mere hour after having watched Nightmare on Elm Street, I knew it could be none other than Freddy Krueger himself. "Hello?" My prepubescent voice quivered, high-pitched and shaky, like a songbird on ice. There was, of course, no response. My bedroom door was open as always. I was far too fearful to seal myself away in the dark, and I briefly considered making a run for it. But Krueger has those bladed fingers, you know? I was no athlete. My long jump was short and my short jump was inevitable, so the likelihood of him hacking into my Achilles upon landing seemed a strong one. So what did that leave? I could holler for my parents, and while at least one of them would certainly have to come check in on me, it posed the risk that they too would be murdered by Freddy Krueger, or they'd find nothing and think me just a silly little boy, and there was no denying that I in fact was a very silly little boy. But this was no laughing matter. The other option, and it ultimately ended up being the one I chose, was to cower beneath the covers atop my bed, praying that Freddy would treat my Ninja Turtles comforter as some sort of impenetrable fortress. So I ducked inside and hid, intending to ride it out until sunrise, when all of a sudden I heard another bump. And not just heard it, but felt it as well. The vibration of something sizable bumping beneath my bed. This was confirmation of a monster, as my only pet was a hamster, my sister was a baby, my parents weren't nearly mischievous enough to pull such a prank. In response to the bump, I squealed. The short squeal quickly suppressed, like a chirp of air released from a balloon. I covered my mouth with my hand and held my breath, and while I didn't break into tears just then, there was no denying I was in fear for my life, which my rapidly pounding heart made abundantly clear. I peeked from my covers and stole another glance at my open doorway, reconsidering the first option. But that thought quickly dissipated as the door suddenly and without any visible assistance slammed shut. Option B went into effect. "Help!" I screamed, over and over, until my door flung open and my parents came rushing in, flicking on my lights in the process. "Jacob, what's wrong?" my mom said, first to my bedside. I searched for words, stumbled over the ones I found, and stuttered as they left my mouth. "Monster," I said, "under my bed." Mom and Dad exchanged glances with one another as if to say, "This nonsense again?" But this time my complaint came with what looked to be shell shock, and although my parents did not believe in monsters, and certainly not the kind who hide under beds, they weren't going to leave my room without first putting my mind at ease. So, my dad knelt and looked beneath my bed. To my surprise, stood back up fully intact. "No monsters down there," he said. "But Freddy Krueger can blend in and kill me in my dreams." Mom looked at Dad and said, "I told you not to let him watch that movie." "But it's almost Halloween," Dad argued. "He's only 10. I watched horror movies when I was his age. I never got scared." Mom sighed. "That's because you're a sociopath, Jem." "I'm not." Mom ignored him and dabbed my eyes away with the edge of my comforter. "Sorry, sweetie. Your dad shouldn't have let you watch that movie." "But it's just a movie. It's not real." "But what if it is?" I said. "It's not. I promise." "But what about the thing that was bumping against my bed, or my door closing?" "Our mind can play all sorts of tricks on us when we're scared. Your bed probably pops and shifts all the time without you noticing. The springs do that sometimes, and you don't know how many times I've had to open your door in the morning because it's shut while you were sleeping. Dad needs to fix that." Dad smiled and patted my leg. Yeah, bud, it's something wrong with the door, that's all. How about we prop it open with something tonight? Dad turned around and grabbed a chair from the corner of my room and placed it against the door. How's that? Good, I guess, I said. Yeah, Mum said, then fluffed my pillows and tucked me in. Now, get some sleep. And don't you worry about monsters. They aren't real. Promise? Promise. She kissed me on the forehead as she walked out the door and flicked the lights off. I was once again alone in the eerie darkness of my room, but with a newfound armor of parental reassurance. My parents said monsters weren't real, and back in those days, my parents might as well have been omniscient. But I soon learned that not to be the case when, as I lay in my bed, confident and comfortable, I heard a new noise. The sound of wooden chair legs sliding across a wooden floor. Not being pushed into the hallway by a heavy door would mean that sound was moving away from me. But this was coming toward me. I opened my eyes and sure enough, the chair was sliding into my room and away from the door. Then about 3 feet from me, it stopped and the door remained open. Hello? I said. Then, the door shut and the room became even darker, and before I could scream, a heavy kick against the bottom of my bed launched me into the air and sent me crashing onto the floor. I'd landed hard on my side, but kids are pretty durable, and I was no exception. I was startled and a bit sore, but mostly unscathed. I had landed in such a way that I was facing beneath my bed, peering straight into the monster's lair. And that's when I saw it. It goes without saying that despite my fears that night, Freddy Krueger is in fact nothing more than a fictional character. But I did not see Freddy Krueger. What I saw as I lay there on my floor, peering into the dark void beneath my bed, were 2 large red eyes peering right back at me. And beneath those eyes was a large white toothy grin. The monster did not move. It just sat there, smiling and breathing. Soon, those breaths began to pulsate, and gradually it became a low hissing snicker. The monster was laughing, and I started screaming. Help! I scurried across the floor and yanked the door open, and bounded down the hallway to my parents. Never again did I sleep in that room, much to my parents' dismay. I spent far too many nights nestled in bed with Mum and Dad, and when I was finally brave enough to leave their room, I moved in with my baby sister in her room, desperately pleading with my parents not to then move her into my old room. The monster was real, I told them. Years went by and I would not budge. I even got rid of the bed and bought one that was flush with the floor, but it wasn't enough to get me to move back in. Eventually, my parents did the only thing they felt they could. They sold the house. Although they didn't believe in the monster, they couldn't convince me to think the same. And even today, my parents will talk about the time they had to sell their house because of my unrelenting insistence that there was a monster under my bed. They can laugh at it now, maybe over a couple of drinks while in the company of friends, but that's because the idea of a monster under a bed is so silly to them. Most would agree, but now, at 30 years old, if anyone mentions my childhood fear of the thing that lurked beneath my bed, I still do not hesitate to tell them the truth. The monster is real. I found an old cassette tape in an abandoned mental institution. I never should have listened to it. By Carl B. 1961. Me and my friends Jordan, Ashley and Sam are urban explorers in our free time. You're probably familiar with the type of stuff we do, but in case you're not, we go around exploring abandoned locations, record it on our phones and upload the videos on YouTube. Old abandoned warehouses, amusement parks, industrial complexes, you name it, we've done it. It's a fun hobby, but it can be scary, not to mention dangerous. Some of the places we've explored are condemned structures so dilapidated They look like a strong wind would knock them down. You have to be careful navigating those places and constantly stop to inspect your surroundings. You never know when a rotted stairway might give way under your feet or a rusted catwalk might collapse and send you plunging 50 feet to the hard concrete floor. Not to mention there's always the possibility of running into some strung out drug addict or crazy homeless person squatting there. Plus, what we do isn't exactly legal. We've had some close calls. Once a security guard chased us out of a deserted factory. Another time, someone actually called the cops on us. Luckily the guy wasn't too much of a hard ass and he let us go with a warning. You probably think we're stupid or crazy to do what we do. And maybe you're right. But that's just the way we are. We enjoy the thrill of it. 2 weeks ago, Sam got a tip on a new place that seemed like primo material for our next video, especially with Halloween approaching. An old crumbling mental hospital in the next county. It had been built in the late 1800s and had been abandoned for 30 years or so, the early 90s I believe, and had a pretty sordid past. Supposedly, it was shut down after some kind of scandal involving an investigative reporter who went undercover as a patient and uncovered all kinds of abuse and neglect on the part of the staff. There were even rumors that the doctors were conducting all kinds of fucked up secret experiments on the patients. None of that is substantiated, of course. It's just the type of typical bullshit urban legends that spring up around a place like that. The official story is the hospital was closed due to the government cutting their funding for budget reasons. According to Sam, the place was scheduled to be demolished soon in order to put up an apartment complex, so this was probably our only chance to check it out. So, last weekend, the four of us hopped into Jordan's old Mazda and made the 2-hour drive out there. The institution was located in a relatively rural area on the outskirts of a city. As soon as it came into view, we knew we wouldn't be disappointed. A forbidding grey stone building, 4 stories tall, with narrow barred windows, stood in the middle of a sprawling, heavily overgrown lawn behind a high rusted chain link fence with razor wire coiled over the top. The main gate was adorned with a faded no trespassing sign, marked with a couple 22 bullet holes, and secured with a thick chain and heavy padlock. But after a few minutes of poking around, I actually found a place in the fence where some intrepid explorer before us had snipped a decent sized hole through the chain link fence, probably with a bolt cutter. We slipped through it easily, then made our way up the long overgrown driveway towards the main building. The closer we got, the more creeped out I started to feel. The immense stone building seemed to loom over us, its imposing facade almost resembling a scowling face with many narrow barred eyes, and stared coldly down at the 4 intruders approaching it. The main entrance doors had been nailed shut at one point, but someone, presumably the same person who cut a hole in the fence, had pried off the sheet of plywood that had once covered them, and they stood wide open, like the gaping mouth of a beast getting ready to swallow its prey whole. We paused for a couple minutes, still about 20 yards away, so that Sam could film Jordan standing in front of the institution as he did a brief intro. Then we closed the remaining distance, all of us with our phone cameras on and recording, and entered the decrepit building. We were in the main lobby/reception area. The floor was littered with all kinds of debris and trash, dead leaves that had blown in through the open doors, emptied beer cans, fast food wrappers, cigarette butts, you name it. Presumably stuff that had been left over by kids using the building as a hangout spot and homeless people looking for a place to get drunk and crash for the night. The walls were marked with graffiti. A bedpan, one of those old school steel ones, stood on the reception desk. None of us dared approach it for a closer inspection. We looked for a while and eventually found the main stairway, standing next to the long dead elevators. No electricity. We went upstairs to explore the second story. It was the hospital's administrative wing. Offices, mostly. Honestly, there wasn't much interesting in most of them. The place had been pretty thoroughly cleared out when the institution was shut down, and all that remained here was empty filing cabinets and discarded pieces of ancient office equipment. In the hospital director's office, a cardboard shoebox stood open on the otherwise bare desk. I peered inside and saw it contained a number of old audio cassette tapes, still in their cases. I flipped through them out of curiosity. There was a couple dozen of them. They had various names and dates carefully printed on the labels. I didn't know what they were, but Sam suggested that maybe they were recordings of therapy sessions with former patients. I grabbed one at random and threw it in my pocket to take back with me, just as a souvenir. Then we continued our investigation, filming anything we found that looked even remotely interesting. Truthfully, The whole trip was kind of a letdown. There wasn't much to see or film. The top 2 floors were patient rooms, but they were almost all vacant except for a couple rusted bed frames, more litter, and an occasional graffiti artist's tag. The place didn't even have a particularly sinister or creepy ambience once you were inside. There were no operating tables spattered with dried blood or rusted surgical implements, not even a spooky abandoned wheelchair standing in one of the corridors. The institution had been minimum security when it had been in operation, so it wasn't like there had been any especially violent or dangerous patients kept locked up there. In other words, there was no dungeon ward in the basement where the likes of Hannibal Lecter had been imprisoned safely away from the general population. It could have been an abandoned office building for all the atmosphere it generated. After about an hour, we decided to call it quits. Jordan filmed the outro, apologizing to the audience for the video being such a disappointment, and then we left, got back into our car, and drove home without incident. I went on with my normal routine and had pretty much forgotten all about our exploration of the mental hospital until Wednesday morning, when I was getting ready to leave for work. I couldn't find my car keys, which I typically carried in my pants, and was desperately hunting my apartment for them in a rush to not be late. I searched for them in my jacket pocket, not finding them, but instead the cassette tape I'd swiped from the institution. I had completely forgotten all about it. I had other priorities at the moment, so I just tossed it on my desk for the time being and went on with my search. I eventually located my keys. They had slipped down my pants and found their way under the cushions of my couch, and got to work only a couple minutes late. That evening, when I got home, I spotted the cassette on my desk, and after dinner, decided to give it a closer inspection. It was one of those 9-minute jobs that fit into a full-size portable tape recorder, carefully printed on a label by hand in faded black ink, with the words Bennett Michael, and a date, 8/17/91. Intrigued, I went into the garage and dug around until I found my dad's old recorder. I popped in some new batteries, then inserted the cassette. I wasn't sure if either the recorder or the tape would still function after all this time, but figured it was worth a try. I plugged a pair of earbuds into the recorder, put them on, then pressed the play button. For a few seconds, there was only a hissing sound, then a dry clinical man's voice spoke in a professional monotone. The audio quality was still surprisingly clear, and only slightly degraded even after 30 years. Patient 67531, Bennett S. Michael. Session number 7, session being conducted by Dr. Eugene Winters at 2 p.m. on August 17th, 1991. There were a few seconds of hissing silence, then the audio resumed. At first the only sound was a man's heavy, slightly uneven breathing, and the professional, clinical voice from before, the doctor, spoke. "How are you feeling today, Michael?" The ragged breathing continued. There was no answer. "Michael?" A second voice spoke. It sounded like it belonged to a younger man. The voice was agitated and tight with suppressed emotion. The voice of a man in turmoil struggling to maintain his composure. "What the fuck do you care how I feel? What does it matter anyway? There's nothing you can do. All you do is ask me the same goddamn questions over and over again, every single time." The emotion behind those words could have been rage, or something else. "It's an integral part of your therapy, Michael. We have to get to the root of whatever is the source for your mental distress in order to give you the necessary treatment you require so that you can fully function normally again and return to society." "Bullshit!" The younger man interrupted with a shout. "You're just playing with my fucking head, like all the other shrinks did. To you, I'm just another freak you can play your little mind games on. Some nut you can exploit to get published in all the big-shot medical journals." "I'm only trying to help you, Michael." A contemptuous snort. "There's nothing you can do to help me, Doc. There's nothing anyone can do." "Please, Michael, you have to work with me if you want to get out of here. You refuse to tell the other doctors what you're so afraid of, what caused you to wake up in the night screaming. Why don't you tell me, Michael? Tell me what you've been so scared of all these years." Several moments of silence. Then the man spoke again. All the rage was gone from his voice, but the fear remained. "Fine, I'll tell you. Just so I can tell someone and finally get it out. You'll think I'm crazy, but everyone already does. That's why I'm in this loony bin. So why the fuck not?" He chuckled humorlessly. He took a few seconds to gather himself before he began.
Do you know what it's like to live your whole life knowing the worst thing you could ever know, Doctor? The worst thing anyone could ever know? Do you know what it's like to live every single moment in pure terror?
Terror of what, Michael?
What if you could see things that other people couldn't? Things that people weren't meant to see. No things humans weren't meant to know. I can see these things, Doctor. It started when I was 8 or 9. And that's when I first began seeing them.
Them? The doctor asked.
The Forgotten Ones. That's what I call them.
They call themselves the Ancient Ones, or the Originals. What are they, Michael? These Forgotten Ones? People talk about hauntings, about seeing ghosts. You hear about it all the time. Some people even claim to be able to communicate with them, channel them for a living. Spiritualists, psychics, whatever you want to call them. Most of them are full of bullshit, frauds. But maybe a few are the real thing. But psychics deal with dead people, human ghosts. The man paused to allow a shaky sigh.
If it was the ghosts of people, I might be able to cope with that. Maybe I could have gotten used to it and come to accept it with time. But the Forgotten Ones are not human. And they never were.
Go on, Michael. I'm listening. The doctor urged him.
They're old. Very, very old. They died long before mankind ever existed on the earth. But before they died, they lived here for a long, long time.
The planet is billions of years old, Doc, and human beings have only been around for a couple million.
Do you honestly think ours was the first civilization to ever exist? That no one was here before us? They were the original rulers of Earth. They've been dead for hundreds of millions of years, long before ever the dinosaurs came along. But their spirits are still here. They always have been. Invisible to us, watching us. There is no afterlife, you see. No heaven, no hell. When you die, your spirit is just stuck here, forever.
The Forgotten Ones saw the human race evolve. They saw our civilization rise.
And they hate us. They've always hated us. They see us as intruders, invaders, thieves who took the world that was once theirs for ourselves.
I see, the doctor interjected patronizingly.
Yeah, sure you do,
the man muttered cynically.
What do these Forgotten Ones look like, Michael? You don't want to know,
the man replied in a strained, trembling voice.
They're monstrous, beyond description, and so full of rage, and envy, and vengeance. I know all this because they tell me.
They communicate to you? The doctor asked.
Oh yes, all the time. They know I can see them. I can't understand what they're saying when I'm awake. They speak in their own language. But when I'm asleep, they come to me in my dreams. And then I can understand. The Forgotten Ones hate us, but they can't harm us. They can't touch us because they're ghosts and we're alive. We're safe from them, as long as we're alive. But when we die, when our spirits separate from our mortal bodies and we cross over into their realm, then it's payback time.
There was a long pause. The doctor said nothing to break the silence. The man resumed.
Whoever came up with the notion of hell, of demons, of tortured souls and eternal damnation, maybe, just maybe, they caught a glimpse of what the Forgotten Ones do to the spirits of the dead.
That was where the recording ended. The audio cut off and the hissing silence resumed. I listened for a couple more minutes, but there was nothing else. Then I turned off the recorder, ejected the cassette tape, and just sat staring at it for a long time, disturbed by what I just listened to. Out of curiosity, I entered Michael S. Bennett and the name of the mental hospital into Google and did a search. I found an obituary in the local newspaper for a Michael Samuel Bennett. He had died on November 11th, 1994 at the age of 31, but the obit didn't say how. I did a bit more digging and found a newspaper article about his death. He had died alone in his apartment of liver failure after a long struggle with alcohol addiction. There was a picture of a man with a gaunt face and dark, haunted eyes. I couldn't find anything to suggest that he had a history of mental health issues or had ever been a patient of the institution. Maybe his family wanted to keep that out of the paper. Maybe the hospital records had been kept confidential. Maybe it wasn't even the same guy. The things that guy said on the tape still creeps me out. He sounded so convinced, so sincere about the things he claimed to be able to see. I tell myself I'm making a big deal out of nothing, that what I had heard had been nothing but the rambling, paranoid delusions of an extremely disturbed mental patient, and that's all it is. Right? That's all it can be. Right? I was hired to notice things out of place by Satin Dead. As a kid, I was scared of pretty much everything. At night, I'd see faces moving in the wallpaper. I'd see branches slither like snakes. Piles of clothes turned to slumped bodies, lamps looked like heads, and the front of cars grinned at me with sinister intent. I could also hear them. A creaking door would sound like a groan. The wind would scream and floorboards would breathe heavy sighs. To me, there were ghouls, ghosts, and monsters around every corner. Needless to say, I was a nervous kid. Turns out it wasn't just an active imagination. I have a condition. It basically boils down to chronic overactive pareidolia. You know that thing where you can see faces in cars or shapes of people in trees? That's pareidolia. It's a sort of defense mechanism that humans have evolved in those camouflage creatures, like jaguars and snakes, and to discern the sound of encroaching predators. But to me, it's about 16 times more noticeable than what is normal for the average person. I see things everywhere, all the time. Of course, there were treatments. By age 12, I had 6 different regimens over a total of 4 years, and the side effects were brutal. Some would make me irritable, while others would make me hyper-focused. One type of medication just straight up put me to sleep. By age 18, I thought I'd never get a job. I was barely dragging myself through school, and there was no way I'd make it through college. I was on a course of drugs that barely kept me together, but they gave me these awful tics. I'd drop things, I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my leg would shoot out and trip me. That was a mess. My mum had to cover the stairs and handrail in grip tape. A few years ago, I had a standing meeting with the county employment services every Thursday. I hated it. On a particularly bad day, my mum had to drive me there. The meds were kicking my ass. She dropped me off at the end of the street, and just in that short walk to the office, I almost tripped into a brick wall. I was so flustered I knocked over a trash can. But for the first time in a couple of years, I had an interview with a potential employer. I didn't think much of her. She was just some old woman in a warm coat. She introduced herself as Teresa and told me that she'd heard a lot about me. She offered me a trial and a hefty one-time payment. I didn't get the clear idea about what I was supposed to do, but she told me that secrecy was part of it. The only demand she had was that I stop taking my meds. Still feeling the trash smell on my pants, I took Teresa up on her offer. On my first day of work, I had no idea what to expect. I'd been off my meds for a week and I'd barely slept. It was hard to wrap my head around the world as I'd seen it as a kid. I'd see faces in the walls, in the shadows, in the leaves and patterns, pretty much everywhere. I'd hear voices and screams in every breaking car, in crinkling paper, in creaking floors. It was hard staying focused, and I was so jumpy I could barely move without flinching. Teresa picked me up in a grey sedan. She was wearing a headset and kept looking over at the GPS. I noticed her leg was twitching, and that she kept biting her lip. She barely looked at me that whole ride. We finally arrived at a small yard, about a 40-minute drive off the highway. There were 2 large trailers and a single-story rundown prefab house from the 60s. One of those things with cheap wood panels and matching broken windows. There were 8 other vehicles in the yard, 4 sedans, 2 vans, a jeep, and a bus. They'd set up warning tape, a command tent with laptops and an antenna, spotlights, and half a dozen crates covered with blue tarps. There were armed men with assault rifles, security personnel with handcuffs, and a couple of medics standing by with first aid kits and stretchers. I was swarmed as soon as I stepped out of the car. They fitted me with a headset, protective gloves, a heart monitor, and tagged me with a plastic ribbon around my left wrist. All the while, Teresa was just looking around, a bead of sweat stinging her eye. "What are we looking at?" she asked. 3? 4? "Just one," I heard in the headset. "We got it early. You got the spot?" "On sight," she responded. "Any blues?" "No blues. We're clear." Teresa finally turned to me. She faced me, put her hands on my shoulders, and talked slowly. "This seems like a lot," she said. "All I want you to do is to go inside, carefully, and tell me what you see." "Why?" I asked. "What's in there?" "I don't know," she sighed. "None of us knows. But we think you can see it." "Is it dangerous?" She shook her head. "We don't know. We're trying to get to know them." There was a flurry of instructions. I had to sign a waiver. They took pictures of me from 6 different angles and took several blood samples. They took a swab from my tongue, checked my eyes, and fitted me with a pair of safety goggles. Teresa took them from me just seconds later. "Nothing around the eyes," she said. "You need to see clearly." They asked me to approach the door while they were running some kind of diagnostic. Weapon checks, system checks, ready checks. Felt like we were launching a rocket. I could feel my legs shaking. "I'm with you all the way," Teresa said over the headset. "You can leave at any time. Just tell me what you see. And I really mean what you see." A countdown began. At 0, the spotlights turned on, and the entire yard turned into a soundless ghost town. Everyone held their breaths. It was my turn. I stepped inside. A simple 1-story house. 3 rooms, a bathroom, a kitchen. Someone clearly lived there until recently. There were still clothes flung over a chair in the living room. The power was off, but the pale spotlights coming in through the windows made it feel like I was walking through a hospital waiting room. My heart was pounding on my chest. I didn't know what to expect, but this payday could be the boost I need to get my own place. A paycheck with 4 zeros for a single day of work. But standing there, looking into the sterile living room, I was having doubts. "What do you see?" asked Teresa. "Notice anything?" "No, just furniture. A couch, an old TV, a fancy carpet, nothing out of the ordinary. I just walked around, saying out loud what I was seeing. As the minutes passed, Teresa was getting impatient. "These are just things," she said. "I need you to tell me what you really see." I entered the bathroom, and immediately felt this awful feeling in the pit of my stomach. A noise tickled my ear. Looking in the bathroom mirror, I could see something moving behind me. In a heartbeat, I caught a glimpse of a pair of blue eyes. I turned around, screaming, Something moved!" I flung myself backwards, closing the bathroom door with the tip of my fingers. I stumbled, tearing down the shower curtains and crushing a cockroach. Lying there with my feet in the air, I tried to remember to breathe. Rarely have I ever been so scared that I had to remind myself to breathe. My fingers tingled with adrenaline. "Tell me what you saw," Teresa yelled. "What's in there?" "Blue eyes! It had blue eyes." "Did you see where it went?" I didn't. To the best of my knowledge, it was still outside the door. "Look again," she continued. "Look again, then get out." She had to coax me out of the bathtub. She encouraged me, spurred me on, and reminded me that I had to leave that room one way or the other. It probably took them 15 minutes to get me out of the tub, and when they did, I could barely feel my feet. When I finally opened the bathroom door, I couldn't see anyone. The hallway was empty. I carefully stepped out, looking around. Nothing. Standing in the middle of the living room, I felt like an idiot. This is exactly what I was taking my medication for. Paranoia and sudden bouts of fear. It dawned on me that maybe I was influenced by all the people outside and their preparations. I was walking in here, expecting to see something. They'd woke me up, so of course I was going to see something. But then again, there was an odd painting on the wall that I hadn't paid attention to earlier. It was the strangest thing. It was a sort of thrift store painting, showing two women walking across a bridge on a hot summer's day. It was sort of generic, but I'd been hyper-vigilant when I first stepped in. You know that feeling when you say a word over and over so many times that it starts to sound like a noise? That's the feeling that fell over my eyes. The pictures start to blur and disappear, turning into swirling colours. And there, in that blur, I saw those blue eyes. There were small blue spots in the water on the sides of the bridge in the painting. That's what I'd seen. And there, I'd seen a face. Something blending into my sight, disappearing. And for a second, I knew for certain that I hadn't seen this painting when I first stepped inside. And now, it knew that I could see it. I felt it. I slowly started to back out. "There's something in the painting," I whispered. "In the living room."
"You sure?"
Teresa asked.
"Absolutely sure."
"Absolutely."
"Get out."
I rounded the corner and heard the floorboards creak. I could no longer see the painting, and I could sense something move. Backing out the front door into the cool autumn air, I could feel hands on my shoulders. Armed men pulled me back, and paramedics started checking my eyes with flashlights. They asked me all sorts of personal questions, like my name, my mother's maiden name, and the name of the president. I was told to lay down as I heard a team breach the house with stun guns, cattle prods, nets, and a crate. Laying there and feeling the pressure subside, I just cried and laughed. I didn't even notice Teresa sitting down next to me. I was given a cold drink and a pill, and I took it without question. "You did good," she said. "You're done. You're done." What was that? What's in there? Something only a special mind can see. That was my first time working with Teresa. Over the coming years, I'll be called in about once or twice a month, and the pay I got from those few days were enough to get me out of my parents' house. Teresa would check in with me weekly, and I had to submit to regular checkups, but more often than not, I was completely off the leash. I started to learn a bit more about the company I was working for, and what they were doing. I started getting payments from Hatchet Biotechnica, a subsidiary of Hatchet Pharmaceuticals. My official title was contractor, a title that was repeated like a name. Teresa started going into greater details on what to look for and how to act, but the first mission was a sort of test to prove myself. I had no idea what I was actually proving, but it felt like my tendency to discern patterns and see dangers helped me along. I learned a bit more about their procedures. For example, they were adamant about checking for blues. This meant surveying the nearby area to look for some kind of infection, usually taking the form of miscolored flowers, most often blue, but not always. Sometimes tulips, most often sunflowers. Once they just found a bunch of teeth sticking out of the wall. Whenever they checked for blues, this is what they will look for, something overtly strange and unnatural. When something like this was found, the whole mission would be called off, and they would use controlled explosives to just take out the entire area. In more populated areas, they'd set up tents and use flamethrowers. I remember once, the week before Christmas, when 6 men with flamethrowers were called to burn down a greenhouse. I'll never forget the way the flames reflected off their visors. To them, it all just looked like flames. But I saw something else. I saw bodies wreathing in the flames. I heard screams in the shattered glass. And the charred remains of melted plastic, I'd see pained faces glaring at me with hateful black eyes. Up until a few months ago, I had worked a total of 33 cases over 2.5 years. Every case I'd step into a location and look for 1 to 3 things hiding in plain sight. Up until that point, I still had no idea what they actually were. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of something running past me or see a pair of blue eyes looking at me from across the room. Every time, I just reported it and left. A chair, a fridge, a suspicious window. Hell, once it was a music box. This time, we were just coming up to a house. It was a rainy autumn evening, and the area was already set up when we got there. I saw a for sale sign knocked over by one of the jeeps who'd taken a wide turn. I got suited up. Blood samples, plastic wrap, all that jazz. It was set up to be just another job. Although I was still nervous, I was getting better. "No blues?" asked Teresa. "None," said one of the armed men. We're looking at a single tango. You sure? Teresa squinted. First report said 6. Secondary reading says 1. We might have runners. Notify the Galapagos, she sighed. Put him on the hunt. She turned to me with a smile, tapping me on the shoulder. In and out. You got this. I got this, I repeated. Yeah. Standard routine. Countdown, spotlights, game on. It felt like I was stepping onto a stage. As I walked through the door and saw my shadow stretch out across the floor, I felt like a hunter. That I was the one to fear, and that whatever stayed in this house tried to hide for good reason. The floor's crooked, I noted. Strange place. You sure? Yeah, I nodded. Definitely. I steadied myself and started checking the rooms one by one. I waited for that feeling to emerge, my eyes seeing through the obvious and seeing the picture beneath the picture, the blue eyes emerging from nothing, and the patterns of shadowy figures growing clearer. Just relaxing and expecting that feeling to wash over me was enough to put me at ease, but I could still feel a primal part of me tickling my nerves, expecting me to panic. But nothing happened. I checked the kitchen, the living room, the bedroom. There was nothing. Just a strangely crooked floor, empty rooms, and the echo of my own footsteps. An empty guest bedroom with a single window. Through it, I imagined a scowling face in the trees outside. 20 minutes passed and I got nothing. I reported to Teresa, and she assured me I was still getting readings from inside the house. Something was still in there with me, but I hadn't seen anything. I went through cycles of denial, fear, and anger, over and over. What was I missing? Finally, I just sat down in the middle of the living room floor. I scratched my eyes, sighed, and tried to relax. Teresa, I'm not feeling it. Are you sure? There was no response. Teresa. Yeah, she responded, absent-mindedly. Yeah, no, we're good. Hold on for a minute. We good? I asked. What do you mean, we good? Again, no response. I stomped around for another 10 minutes before I went up to a window facing the front yard. It was hard to see through the glare of the spotlight. Teresa? I'm coming out. The place is empty. As soon as I opened the front door, I saw 24 faces fixed on me. Maybe they were surprised to see me, but I got the sense that there was something else. I could tell something was off. They all looked at me with strange expressions, some neutral, some smiling ear to ear. While the paramedics just stared at me with slack-jawed terror. It was as if they didn't know what to feel or how to express it. A hole sunk through my stomach. I got that hollow feeling as my eyes glazed over, like I was staring at something false, something hiding a pattern. This was the sense I'd been looking for inside, and now I was feeling it. In the far back, I saw Teresa. She stepped out from behind a jeep, smiling ear to ear. Behind the shape of her face, her eyes merged, glowing with a cold blue. One by one, their eyes flared up in a blue glow, and there, in a moment, my paranoid sight registered human-like shapes in the grass around them, headless, mauled bodies. Imposters, lookalikes, mimics, nightmare beings having tricked us into a trap. One by one, smiles started creeping across their faces, rows of impossibly sharp teeth hiding along tongues, their fingers growing longer, their necks elongating. They were losing their disguises and facing me, head on, unafraid. Nothing was said out loud. Not a word. But to me, it was as if the wind itself was screaming for me to run. I slammed the door behind me and ran. Faces were coming out of the walls, door handles turning into hands, grasping at my clothes, my distorted face reflecting in windows and mirrors with jawless grins. I couldn't blink. Every heartbeat, a new horror forced my eyes open. There were more doors than I remembered, there were more windows than there should be. The kitchen suddenly had a skylight, and there were 4 fridges. Countless paintings had appeared in the master bedroom depicting cruel and blood-drenched horrors. They were already here, trying to surround me, and my mind was racing to remember what was real and what wasn't. Rushing to the back of the guest bedroom, I remembered there being only 1 window. Now, there were 2. I had to roll the dice. Take a guess. Do something. As I grabbed the window frame, I imagined teeth slamming into my hands, tongues licking across my palms, wide smiles sating their hunger. But this time, it was just my imagination. I burst through the window and took off running into the woods. Through the night, I just kept going. My chest hurt from holding the screams in. Without my medication, everything in the dark looked like something reaching for me, trying to eat me, trying to grab me. Creaking branches sound like laughter, and howling winds were screams. I must have run for hours when my foot got caught between two rocks. As I tumbled to the ground, twisting my ankle, I saw them descend on me. I felt their fingers scratching me. I writhed on the ground, screaming for them to just let me go, to just please let me go. But after a few seconds, I realized I just scratched myself on the underbrush. There was no one there. I was safe. I broke down crying, trying to ignore the twisted face reflecting off the full moon above. Eventually, I made my way home. There were no messages waiting for me. All my work numbers had been taken offline. All ways to contact them were just gone, and there was no info on the firm that hired me. Hatchet Biotechnica existed only on paper. There was no location, no contact info, and no names attached. It's all a front. I haven't heard from Teresa since. I think that whoever I've been working for have just assumed I'm dead. That's why I decided to share this anonymously. Those who know who I am can reach out to me. And for those who don't, I just have a word of warning. Be observant. Trust your intuition. It might save your life. The phone call from my daughter led to the most terrifying experience of my life. My Zacharias Frost. It's always been one of my biggest fears as a parent to get a sudden phone call from my kid in the middle of the night. The type that causes you to lurch awake in a panic when you see their name illuminate on the phone screen. And last week, I experienced that for the first time. It was by far one of the most horrifying nights of my life. It's obviously no secret that kids like to party in high school. I did it plenty myself, and I'm sure I gave my parents a lot of sleepless nights when I was growing up. And now I guess it's my kid's turn to return the favor. My son just started his junior year of high school, and there have been a few incidents in regards to him being at parties, coming home drunk or stoned, and getting a few tickets from the police. He's a good kid though, and has thankfully never been in serious trouble, and hopefully things will remain that way. I've been stern with him, but I also understand that this is pretty normal behavior for teenagers. My daughter is a freshman in high school this year, and up until now has remained relatively clean in terms of the usual high schooler antics. My wife and I, of course, don't condone underage drinking or partying, but we know it's likely going to happen regardless of what we say. We both agreed long ago that we would always do our best to educate our kids on the dangers, and try our best to influence them away from that lifestyle. I've had numerous talks with both my son and daughter about this, and made sure to reiterate that I don't want them partying, but I'm not able to control their entire lives either. My request that I have repeated ad nauseum to them is that if they're ever in danger or in an unsure situation, to please call me. I don't care what time it is or where they are, I will go pick them up. No questions asked and no grudges held. Better than them getting into the car with some underage drunk driver or something, because we've all heard the horror stories of people's lives being forever changed by one stupid decision. My son has never once taken me up on that offer, and I hope that means he's being responsible. Until last week, my daughter hadn't either, but I'm glad she did, even though it ended up being one of the most terrifying nights of our lives. My phone began to blare loudly on my side table, stirring me from a deep sleep. With a stark sort of nervousness, I leaned over and silenced the annoying tone, glimpsing with the pirate eye stare at my bright phone. The name Amelia illuminated brightly on my screen, and immediately my heart sank. It was just past 2 a.m., and everyone knows nothing good ever happens that late at night. Hello? Dad? Hey, I'm sorry to call so late. No, it's fine, honey. What's up? Are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. We were driving home and my friend's car broke down. Is there any way you could come pick us up? My heart breathed a small sigh of relief then, and I tried to gather my mind. I told her I would of course come and get her, and over the next few minutes she described her location as I got myself dressed. She was a good half an hour drive away, and basically just on the side of a rural stretch of road. She didn't mention what exactly they were doing out there, and in the moment, it didn't cross my mind to ask. I pulled my truck out the complex maybe 10 minutes later, and texted Amelia that I was on my way. Thankfully, the roads were clear at 2 AM, and I was well on my way to her in no time, making much better time the drive would have normally taken me. Only then did I start to realize that I probably could have just called roadside assistance and requested service. It would save me a long drive on a work night, but after all, I'd always told Amelia to call me if she needed help, and I'm glad she did. After entering the highway, I felt my phone begin to buzz in my pocket. I pulled it out and once again saw an incoming call from Amelia. Dad, are you almost here? She spoke suddenly as I answered, a distinct nervousness obvious in her voice. Yeah, about 10 minutes out. Is everything okay? She paused on the other end of the line. I heard one of her friends say something in the background, but I couldn't decipher what it was. Dad, there's somebody out here. There he is, down by that post. Another girl spoke from the other end. What do you mean? Is someone threatening you? I heard them whisper on the other end of the line as I feverishly anticipated a response. Dad, something's wrong. The line then abruptly cut out. I glanced at my phone to see that the call had failed. After trying and failing several times to call her back, I eventually gave up due to lack of service. My heart was throbbing in my chest. An increased desperation caused me to stomp down harder on the gas pedal. A few minutes later, my phone began to buzz in the center console once again. Once again, it was Amelia. Hello? Amelia, are you there? Dad, something's wrong. I'm almost there, Amelia. Hold on. Are you safe? What's going on? There was no response from the other end of the line. Sometimes when I have bad reception, people can call me and speak, but they can't hear me respond. I figured that's what was happening, until she spoke again. Dad, something's wrong. I felt a wave of chills roll down my spine as I heard it. Something about the situation really had me unnerved then. The way Amelia spoke, it was like the same every single time. Almost like it was a recording. The area she had told me they were located was about 15 minutes away from the nearest town on the way to a patch of wilderness. A lot of people go there for camping and whatnot, but the roads were nearly empty that night. Endless rows of trees lined either side of the road, and a cold sweat dampened my brow as I stomped on the gas pedal. Finally, as I rounded a bend in the road a few minutes later, I spotted something up ahead. A lone Subaru Outback on the opposing side of the road. As I got near, I squinted to see better, but saw no one inside. I was fairly certain that was one of Amelia's friend's cars, and since I hadn't seen any others, I figured it had to be them. I pulled my truck up behind it and my headlights beamed through the back window, but I saw no one inside of it. Amelia? I called out from my window, but got no response. I killed my engine then, grabbed my Glock 19 from under the seat and stashed it in the back of my pants. The chilly air gnawed against my skin as I stepped out into the road. An eerie silence subsumed me as I glanced around the environment. The back left tire on the Outback was completely flat, and I figured that's why Amelia had called. I hoped that's all it was, but the fact she wasn't there distressed me greatly. Amelia! I called out, hearing my own voice slash through the dense, silent night. I checked my phone again, but found it was displaying the searching message in place of the bars. The inside of the car was empty when I looked through it, and I shuddered to imagine what could have possibly possessed them to leave their car. None of the possible answers, I concluded, were good. I called out to her a few more times as I searched around the area, but never got a response. On the side of the road, I noticed something laying in the wild grass. As I got closer, I realized there was a purse with a bunch of items spilled out of it. I didn't think it was one of Amelia's, but it was obviously not a good sign. Amelia! I screamed the name at the top of my lungs. But again, there was no response. Something was very wrong about the situation. I felt like I was being watched, but that could have just been my growing apprehension. The discarded purse clearly indicated that whoever it belonged to probably went out into the woods. I knew what I had to do, but the fear that overcame me when I considered going into those woods was amongst the strongest I've ever felt. Every self-preservation in me was screaming for me to not go into those woods, but my little girl was out there, and fleeing was not an option. I made my way to the tree line and entered the woods. The only light I had on me was my phone's flashlight, and it wasn't much. It was at least better than making calls though, and surely better than nothing. Each step I took seemed to crush like thunder when contrasted with the eerily silent night, each dried leaf like a glass vase shattering on impact, and I did my best to move as quietly and efficiently as possible. The Glock remained in my right hand at all times, and my head on a shivering swivel as I persevered onward. In the distance, I started to hear the sounds of trickling water. There was nothing really indicative of anyone having been in there, so I decided to just go towards it. I thought maybe one of them was bleeding and went to the water to wash off a cut or something, even though that would be a terrible idea. By that point, I was just internally scrambling for answers or any sort of clue I could find. A minute later, I stumbled into a small clearing and found the brook I'd heard earlier. The small stream extended in a wavering path both directions, with thick foliage covering much of the bank. On the other side was a small incline, which led deeper into the woods. But once again, there was no immediate signs that anyone had been out there. I really started to panic then, but calling out seemed like a worse idea every time I did it. At the same time, I had to do something. My mind just wouldn't stop racing about some lunatic serial killer or human trafficker. Every father's worst nightmare. After a few moments, I finally decided to turn around and head back toward the road. As I veered back, I stepped by the bank and was able to see around a small bend in the creek. On the other side of an angled tree, I saw something that made me nearly jump out of my skin. Someone was crouching there on the edge of the stream. It was a young woman with dark hair, dressed in a hoodie and blue jeans. As I lifted the light towards her, I realized I recognized her. Natasha, hey, can you hear me? Are you alright? She didn't react as I made my way over to her. She was just crouched there in a sitting fetal position, staring up the incline on the opposing side of the stream. Natasha, hey, it's Amelia's dad. Are you okay? Where's Amelia? Natasha again didn't react in any way. As I finally shined the light on her face, I just saw her staring emotionless. She didn't even look at me. Her eyes were like saucers dilated so heavily that no colour was visible. Considering it was night, that wasn't entirely strange on its own. But what was strange is that I noticed her pupils didn't shrink at all when I shined the light on her. Natasha, I put my hand on her shoulder, but again, got no reaction. I could tell she was breathing, but clearly she wasn't all there. She seemed entirely catatonic, like she was trapped in some sort of hypnotic state. I shook her by the shoulder, called her name, and even flicked water on her from the stream, but she didn't react in any way whatsoever. It was really unnerving. But selfishly, I was still more worried about Amelia. I thought about just letting her wait there and return for her afterwards, as she obviously wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. But the sordid idea occurred that it may be too late for Amelia. The thought alone nearly crippled me from the horrific contemplation, but I knew I could at least get one girl out. I wrapped my arms around Natasha and lifted her off the ground. Her arms were wrapped around her legs, and she maintained that as I lifted her into my arms. Her skin was cold to touch, and with her locked position, it almost gave the impression that she was frozen and stiff. Thankfully, Natasha was rather small, so I was able to carry her back towards the road with little issue. A minute or two later, I got back to my truck and placed Natasha in the back seat. Her utterly silent demeanour and complete lack of reaction had really started to worry me. Just to be sure, I felt her pulse in her neck, and as I anticipated, it was there, feeling pretty much normal. After loading her in the truck, I locked it and resumed my search for Amelia. It was then I noticed that the back left tire on the Outback was not only flat, but absolutely shredded. It looked like it had been flat, but I continued driving on it for several miles. The tread was torn open, revealing the silver rim underneath. As I was inspecting it, I suddenly thought I saw something underneath the car. As I leaned down, I once again got a huge jump scare. Amelia? Amelia, are you okay? There she was, lying prone underneath the vehicle. Like Natasha, she was unresponsive no matter how many questions I asked her. I could see her back moving rhythmically up and down, so I knew she was breathing. Her eyes were pinned open wide, and like Natasha, her pupils were like saucers. I had to basically drag her out from underneath the car. All the while she didn't react in any way whatsoever. She too just appeared in this dazed state, like she was thankfully still alive but not fully conscious. I've never seen anything like that with her or anyone else before. As soon as she was out from underneath the car, she suddenly lurched and wrapped herself into the fetal position. It startled me greatly, and I thought it meant that she was back to normal, but after questioning her again, I still got no reaction. Thankfully, that made it much easier to carry her, and I got her loaded into the truck as well. Natasha still sat there as she had before, and the sight of both of them curled up and unresponsive like that really chilled my veins. As I ran to the back of my truck, I then came upon an incredibly worrying discovery. The back left tire on my truck was suddenly flat as well. A few dozen curse words slipped liberally from my lip as I debated my options. Unfortunately, the jack was underneath the back seat where Amelia and Natasha were. I spun back, eyeing the opposing side of the road and the foreboding, unwavering tree line. Someone was messing with me, and I prayed that's all they were doing. Considering the state of both Amelia and Natasha, however, that didn't seem very likely. As I began retrieving the jack and lowering tool rum underneath the seat, something suddenly caused me to freeze dead in my tracks. I don't know how to explain it, but every single hair on the back of my neck stood up at once, and a wave of chills rolled down my spine. My knees shook and my heart thundered in my chest. It was like some forlorn sixth sense buried deep within me suddenly sensed danger. But danger isn't even a strong enough word for it. It was this truly hopeless, paralyzing sense of impending doom, with corporeal manifestations. Like some ominous presence was enough to rattle me to my very core. And it was so unfathomably consuming that even the fight or flight response ceased being an option. I was just entirely stricken by terror, like some primal instinct deep within me had suddenly reawakened and set off all the alarm bells at once. I'd been anxious the whole time I'd been there considering the circumstance, but it was nothing compared to that horrendous sense of crippling fear. I glanced frantically around the vicinity, but nothing appeared immediately wrong. Nothing I could see, that is. I really wish I had the words to properly convey the feeling, but at the same time I don't, because I truly hope no one ever has to experience that feeling. "Dad!" Amelia's voice suddenly called out, but it wasn't Amelia who had spoken it. It came from the opposing side of the road. My heart sunk like a lead weight in my chest as I spun back to face the arboreal blockade. I saw nothing. I heard nothing aside from the familiar voice and uncanny tone. "Dad, something's wrong." I didn't think my heart could sink any lower, but as those words pierced the obsidian night, I was proven wrong yet again. It was Amelia's voice yet again, and it was spoken the exact same way I'd last heard it on the phone. "Dad, something's wrong. Dad, something's wrong. Dad, something's wrong." The voice seemed to distort the more it repeated. My legs finally resumed function beneath me, and I had seen enough. I just got back into the truck with my hands trembling so bad that I struggled to hit the push start. Finally, I did, and the truck fired back to life. Outside, I heard the voice repeating, but it seemed to change the location every time it did. The first few were off the left of us on the opposing side of the road, but then it came from behind me, then up ahead with only a few seconds interval between each repetition. Branches then snapped over to my left and something emerged from the woods. Suddenly I felt woozy, lightheaded, and like I was about to pass out. My vision swam around me and it suddenly felt like I just shotgunned a handle of Jack Daniels. It wasn't like the feeling of being drunk though. It was something far more terrifying than that. Like my very sentience was being drained from my body. The thing emerged fully from the woods, looming like a shadow on the peripheries of my mind. I can't even begin to describe it, not only because of my extremely blurred state of mind, but because it just feels wrong to do so. The more I stared at it and acknowledged its existence, the worse it got. It's like my feeble human mind wasn't fully capable of comprehending the things my eyes were beholding. I saw other things in the woods, or at least I think I did. So much of this feels like a dream now, it's crazy to even transcribe it. It's like I don't know whether I can even trust my own account of the events anymore. Something was out there though, something truly horrible. I could feel the claws of utter madness scraping against the last frayed remnants of my mind. Its mere presence alone was threatening to tear me from reality and send me spiraling into a dazed delirium the likes of which I could never recover from. Somehow I managed to move the shifter into drive, and with no regard for the flat tire, I slammed my foot down into the gas pedal. It felt like driving with a fishbowl on my head while being upside down. My reactions and muscle memory were just disorientated beyond belief. I have no doubt I was swerving all over the road worse than Lindsay Lohan after a birthday party, but thankfully there was no one around. The tire flapped relentlessly, creating an irritating cacophony and causing my truck to handle terribly, which of course only added to the aforementioned difficulties. By some miracle of fate, I managed to keep the truck on the road for a long enough time. The delirious sensation seemed to lessen the further away I got. After several minutes of driving, I felt mostly back to my normal state of mind. The sigh of relief I breathed then was probably the largest and most cathartic of my life. A few minutes later, and I pulled my shrieking truck into the hospital parking lot. By that point, the tire was almost entirely disintegrated off the rim, and it probably ruined my differential, but none of that mattered to me. I ran inside the hospital and got some of the staff at the front counter, telling them I had 2 girls with me that needed help. The staff followed me out and I picked up the still unresponsive Amelia from the back seat. The security guard picked up Natasha and we carried them back inside. The nurses asked me what had happened as we got them into the hospital beds, but I didn't even know what to tell them. I ended up just saying most of what actually happened and that I found them in the woods. The staff eyed me warily, and I could tell they didn't trust me. I don't blame them either, as I did show up with 2 underage girls in the middle of the night, and under very strange circumstances. I doubt they'd ever seen anyone in conditions like that. The girls very much appeared like they'd been drugged, and although I told them I was Amelia's father, I don't blame them for being suspicious of me. Even as the police showed up and began questioning me, I forced myself to remain calm for the sake of Amelia. They asked me what had happened and I told them pretty much everything I've written here today, but in the most rational means I could explain. I told them I thought someone had abducted and drugged them, but I didn't see who it was. No way they'd ever believe the more worrying details of the experience though. The cops kept me there in the lobby, not arresting me, but not allowing me to go with Amelia either. Eventually I called my wife and she arrived at the hospital a little while later. I then had to explain everything a 3rd time to her, and she was able to substantiate my claims. The cops eventually radioed into their dispatch and requested officers to go and investigate the scene where I'd found Amelia and Natasha. My wife knew something was up with me. She knew I was rattled by the experience. She tried getting me to tell her more when we were alone, but I told her I'd tell her everything later. One of the nurses came out a little while later and informed us that both girls had been sedated and were now sleeping peacefully. I asked if they had found anything wrong with them, but they said everything was normal as far as they could tell. My wife went back to see them, but the cops didn't want me going considering their suspicions. It was annoying, but I'm trying my best to be charitable to their point of view here. I'd much rather cops take young girls being brought in under mysterious circumstances seriously, even if it meant suspecting me. It's a far better option than them shrugging it off and not much caring about it. I was exhausted by then, and ended up falling asleep on the lobby's couch not long after. I had some pretty severe nightmares then, but I can't consciously remember the details of them now. My wife shook me awake sometime later. As I opened my eyes, I saw the sun had risen, and the lobby had many other people coming and going. Finally, I was permitted to go and see Amelia, and thankfully, she seemed fully conscious and back to her normal self. The same was true for Natasha, whose parents had also shown up to see her. Thankfully, both girls were cleared to return home a few hours later with a full bill of health. In the following days, more details would be added about the case, but unfortunately, most of them had just made all of this more difficult to understand. Amelia and Natasha both tested negative for common drugs like roofies used to incapacitate victims. The drug tested me as well, but as expected it also came back negative. There's always the possibility that they, and even possibly I, was drugged with a more exotic substance that is not normally tested for, but up until now, there's no real evidence of that. On the following morning, the cops went and checked out the area where I found the girls. Natasha's car was still there in virtually the same state I'd found it in. They searched the surrounding woods but weren't able to find much of relevance. As of now, I've been cleared of any wrongdoing in the case, but that doesn't mean things have been resolved. The cops questioned me extensively about the night, and I tried to help them in every way I could. I even told them I thought I'd seen someone approaching my truck as I fled, but stopped short of implying anything beyond that. If you've read all this, then you may be of the same assumption that I am, and came to a similar but far more unbelievable conclusion. There was something unnatural about that night, and although I hesitate to use the word paranormal, I'm really struggling to find a better word for it. Amelia has no memory of what happened to her. She said the last thing that she remembers was Natasha pulling the car over after they got a flat tire. She doesn't remember crawling under the car or me carrying her to the truck. Next thing she says she actively remembers was waking up in the hospital, and Natasha's account was pretty much the same. I've had some horrific nightmares these last couple of days. Nothing in particular that I can recall, just distorted visions of horrific creatures and people along with violence and suffering that causes me to lurch awake in a cold sweat. Amelia has them too, and I suspect, though I'm not certain, that Natasha has had the same. I'll be honest, some of the things Amelia told me lately really has me worried. She said she's seen things that she knows aren't there, and heard voices she knows doesn't exist. Based on the things she's mentioned, I'm starting to get worried that she may be schizophrenic. She's never had these issues before that night. I really hope it isn't the case. I have a good explanation for what happened that night, and all the research I've done hasn't helped much. As of now, I'm hoping I can just write this event off and move on with my life, but I have a horrible feeling that it won't be so easy. If anyone has any theories about what the hell happened that night, please share them. I'm open to any and all potential explanations. One thing I do know is that whatever it was I saw that night is still out there, and that thought terrifies me more than anything else. Hey guys, StalkingJaeger here. I just wanted to add this bit at the end. This is going to be one take. Just to say thank you again. I think the last time I did a big thank you was when we hit 100 subscribers, I think. And now we're at 600, almost 650. That's just phenomenal. Guys, thank you so much. I never thought that it would get this popular. You know, I just wanted to read stories because I'd been listening to creepypastas for about 7 years, and I was just like, if they can do it, why can't I? You know? So I just want to say thank you. Seriously. I don't know if you heard me scratch my arm, but yeah. I have an Instagram that I post a lot on, a decent amount, that I want you guys to get on, because it notifies you of videos and little updates on why videos are taking so long, because trust me, they take a while, and if you guys want them, then you've got explanations there as to, you know, why they're taking so long. So yeah, give my Instagram a follow. It'll be in the description. StalkingJaeger, if you don't want to click on the description. And yeah, just thank you so much for all the support and love and the likes. Oh my god, I don't even have to tell you guys to like the video, subscribe and comment, because you just do it. You guys are yeah, I love you guys, seriously. I know I say seriously a lot and guys, but what else am I'm flustered. I don't know what else to say. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I promise I'm working on The Summer I Met David. I promise you. It's just going to take a little bit longer. But thank you. And I'll see you in November.